Enola was a very beautiful young lady in her early 20s. She was a lady whose beauty was admired by many, and wherever she passed, heads would turn, and this made her to be arrogant and full of herself. Enola was very disrespectful and didn't have any regard for anyone, no matter the age. And because of this, most elderly women and men avoided her like a plague, as she would insult them at any slightest mistake, and you dare not correct her actions, otherwise she would send some village boys to beat you up. She was known as the village slave queen, and she hated mingling with her mates, as she thought none of them was up to her standards. She deserted her childhood friends, and even when they tried to visit her, she would sneak out of the house from the back door. Her friends loved her exceptional beauty and always loved to be around her, but Enola detested that so much. One day, Enola mustered the courage and plainly told them to their faces that she no longer wanted them around her. In her words, she told them that she doesn't want to be contaminated by their stinking bodies and dirty clothes. The friends were so ashamed of themselves, and they left disappointed. They were sad and vowed never to step their feet into Enola's compound again. Even when they came across her on the road, they would pretend as if they saw no one. But all that mattered less to Enola. In fact, that was exactly what she wanted. Enola's mother had called her and tried to correct her about the way she placed herself so high above others. She told her to cut down on so many things and redirect her attitudes, but Enola expressly told her mother to allow her to live her life in full. After all, it wasn't her fault that she was made beautiful. Even her younger sister Fumi hated the way she behaves and talks to people. Fumi, being the younger one, was more reasonable and more accommodating than Enola, though Enola was more beautiful than she was. Fumi had also talked to Enola on several occasions, but Enola was not the type to listen to anyone. Because of Enola's beauty, even at the age of 16, suitors were already coming to seek her hand in marriage, but Enola turned them all down, saying they were all below her standard. She needed a very wealthy man who would marry her and take her to the city to enjoy city life. According to her, she was not born to live and suffer in the village. To her, she would rather stay single than marry any man in the village. And because her beauty always attracts men to her, those men were always willing to give her money, which she uses to buy expensive clothes, jewelry, and even the latest phone. One day, while Enola was outside their house polishing her nails, a young man walked into the compound. He wasn't richly dressed. He was putting on a casual clothes that doesn't look all that fancy. The young man, whose name was Kennedy, greeted Enola, and instead of responding to the young man's greeting, Enola stared at him from head to toe with a disgusted look, and after the long stare, she asked him who he was and the reason for his coming. Kennedy replied and told her that he was in the farm when she walked past there, but he didn't want to call her because he looked dirty then. So he asked around and he was directed to Enola's house, and he was happy that he found her. Enola didn't bother to ask him what he does for a living, so long as he had already mentioned that he was on the farm. The young man also mentioned how he deeply fell in love with her the very first moment he saw her, and that statement alone made Enola very angry. She wondered why all the men coming to marry her are all poor and wretched. Without saying a single word to the young man, Enola stood up and went inside. Kennedy was confused as to why she left in that manner. He looked at himself over and over again to know if there was something wrong with his clothes or if there was anything odd about him, but he sure did not find one. While he was still contemplating Enola's action, the Empress walked out with a bucket of water, and before Kennedy could say a word, she emptied the whole content on him. Kennedy, who was never expecting that, shouted in shock, feeling very embarrassed. Enola warned him seriously never to step foot into their house again, or even to talk to her whenever he saw her walking on the road. At that point, Fumi, Enola's sister, who was just returning from the market, saw what happened. and immediately ran to Kennedy and began to apologize on behalf of Enola. She was deeply sorry for what Enola did to him, and she offered that Kennedy should follow her into the house so she could help him dry his clothes with a pressing iron. Though Kennedy refused, but Funmi insisted. By then, Enola had already walked out on them, leaving the house completely. Funmi took Kennedy into the house, and with a pressing iron, she helped dry up Kennedy's shirt. After that, she saw him up to the gate, still apologizing for what happened, but Kennedy told her that it was okay. From that day, Kennedy and Funmi became good friends, and Kennedy would always visit her. He would also invite her to his house, and Funmi would gladly go to visit him. Their friendship was pure and not hidden from anyone, including the both parents. It got to a point that Enola would always quarrel her sister for being so local-minded and liked the mindset of upgrading her life and becoming a better person in the future. Enola wondered how Funmi managed to bring herself so low to be friends with a common farmer. She also advised her to separate herself from Kennedy, but Funmi paid deaf ears to her. A few months later, Enola was coming back from her evening stroll as usual. When she walked into the house, she saw a fleet of expensive cars parked outside the house. She jumped in excitement, thinking that it must surely be a young man who was interested in marrying her. She was happy that finally her dreams were coming to pass. Immediately, she ran inside, but nearly fainted when she saw Kennedy looking all handsome and fresh. He was dressed in rich, expensive outfits, and everything around him speaks of great wealth. And sitting beside him was Funmi. She was looking like a princess. Enola managed to ask them what was going on, and her mother didn't hesitate to let her know that they came to ask for Funmi's hand in marriage, and Funmi already accepted. So they were celebrating the soon-to-be couple. Enola laughed and asked Kennedy where he borrowed those cars from, and she was sure the clothes he was putting on must be borrowed from the laundryman. Kennedy smiled and told her that he was not who she thought he was, that he was based in the city and also had a company of his own. Kennedy also explained to her that the day he was on the farm was the day he came back to the village and just decided to have some fun on the farm with his friends. Enola's whole body was literally shaking. She knew this was supposed to be for her and not for her sister. She imagined the loss and mockery she would receive from people, and she felt like turning back the hands of time. She was sweating, and the whole place was very hot for her. Enola screamed and began to throw down anything she laid her hands on. Her mother and some other people helped to calm her down. Enola remained in her room crying, and even after Kennedy left, she refused to come out, and no one was willing to go into her room and talk to her. After all, she had been warned on several occasions. After staying for 2 days in her room without talking to anyone, she finally came outside, and both her sister and mother acted like no one was standing beside them. They were intentionally talking about Funmi's upcoming marriage ceremony and how big it was going to be. Enola was in deep regret. She knew she had totally lost out. No one was willing to come close to her, as she had already given them boundaries when she was thinking that the whole world revolved around her and her beauty. Enola went to her friends to apologize to them, but it happened that most of them had already left the village, while those who were still around didn't want to have anything to do with her. Enola's life became lonely and sad. Even on the day of Funmi's marriage ceremony, she remained in her room until everything was done and everyone left. A few months after Funmi's marriage, she made arrangements for her mother to come over to the city, and the happy woman immediately left, leaving Enola in the village to sort out her life by herself. Enola cried until there was no longer strength in her. She wanted to start her life all over again on a clean slate, but no one was there for her anymore. She was full of sadness and regrets.